In the fading light of old Japan, where honor outweighed the fear of death, a handful of samurai stood defiant, knowing their time had come. The year is 1877. Japan is changing rapidly, leaving behind centuries of tradition. The Meiji Restoration has torn down the old ways, welcoming Western technology and new ideas. Samurai, once the proud defenders of the empire, find themselves without a place in this new Japan. Among them is Saigo Takamori, a legendary samurai general who had once helped restore the emperor's power. But now, disillusioned by the rapid modernization, Saigo is torn between his loyalty to the emperor and his commitment to the samurai code. The world he once fought for no longer resembles the one he dreamed of. Saigo gathers 500 loyal samurai, determined to make one final stand. They will not surrender quietly to the forces of modernization. With swords in hand, they prepare to fight, knowing that defeat is inevitable. Yet for them, honor is everything. And so the last battle of the samurai begins. Saigo Takamori was a man of contradictions. Born into a modest samurai family in 1828, he rose to prominence as a warrior and statesman during one of Japan's most tumultuous periods. Saigo was a key figure in the Meiji Restoration, helping to overthrow the Tokugawa shogunate and restore power to the emperor. His loyalty and courage earned him the admiration of many, but it also placed him at the center of a conflict that would tear him apart. At first, Saigo embraced change. He believed in a stronger, united Japan. But as the Meiji government pushed forward with modernization, Saigo became increasingly uneasy. The samurai class, which had upheld the honor and traditions of Japan for centuries, was being discarded. Western military tactics and industrialization took the place of the old ways, and with them, the heart of Japan began to change. Is this the future we bled for? Saigo asked himself, torn between his duty to the emperor and his loyalty to the samurai code. His internal struggle grew as he watched the erosion of the values he held dear. Saigo could not stand by as the soul of Japan slipped away. He made a choice to stand with the samurai, to fight for honor, even if it meant defying the emperor. On the one side stood Saigo and his 500 samurai, armed with katanas, bows, and a few outdated firearms. On the other side was the Meiji army, modern, well-equipped, and far outnumbering the samurai. With rifles and cannons, the imperial forces represented the future of warfare. The contrast could not have been starker. Tradition versus modernity, swords versus guns. The Meiji government had declared Saigo and his rebels as traitors, and they had mobilized an overwhelming force to crush the rebellion. Yet despite the odds, Saigo and his men stood resolute. They had no illusions about the outcome, but they fought for something greater than victory: honor, pride, and the spirit of the samurai. Saigo knew he was outnumbered and outgunned, but his plan was simple: to make a stand at Shiroyama, a mountain overlooking the city of Kagoshima. There the terrain would work in the samurai's favor. The steep slopes would slow the Meiji army's advance, and the samurai could hold them off as long as possible. "If we are to die, let us die with honor," Saigo declared to his men. The samurai prepared themselves for what they knew would be their final battle. They wore their traditional armor, their swords gleaming in the early morning light. For them, it was not about survival. It was about legacy. As dawn broke on the morning of September 24, 1877, the Meiji forces began their assault. Cannons roared and rifle fire echoed across the mountainside. But the samurai, with their swords drawn, stood their ground. In the face of overwhelming firepower, they fought with the skill and precision that had defined their class for centuries. The air was thick with smoke, and the ground shook with the impact of cannon fire, but still, the samurai charged. They fought with a ferocity born of desperation, cutting through the Meiji ranks with their katanas. The contrast between the clashing of swords and the sharp crack of rifles was a stark reminder of the battle between old and new. Saigo led his men from the front, his sword flashing in the dim light. He knew the end was near, but his resolve never wavered. "Better to fall with honor than to live without," he had told his men. And they fought as though those words were burned into their souls. As the day wore on, the Meiji forces slowly gained the upper hand. The samurai, though valiant, could not withstand the constant barrage of artillery and gunfire. One by one, they fell. But even in their final moments, they fought with the honor that defined their lives. Saigo, wounded but unbroken, led his men in a final desperate charge. It was a hopeless endeavor, but for the samurai, it was the only choice. They charged into the teeth of the enemy, swords raised high, knowing full well that this was the end. Yet in that final moment, they achieved a victory of spirit, if not of arms. Saigo Takamori, the last great samurai, fell on the slopes of Shiroyama. His body was broken, but his spirit remained unyielding. Legends say that, mortally wounded, Saigo asked one of his men to help him perform seppuku, the ritual suicide of the samurai. Whether this is true or not, it is clear that Saigo's death marked the end of an era. "A warrior's duty is not to live forever, but to leave a legacy," Saigo had once said. And in death, he did just that. His final stand became a symbol of defiance, of honor, and of the spirit of the samurai. The Battle of Shiroyama was the last stand of the samurai. With Saigo's death, the samurai class was officially abolished, and Japan fully embraced modernization. But even as the nation moved forward, the memory of Saigo and his men lived on. Their final stand became a symbol of honor and courage in the face of overwhelming odds. In modern Japan, Saigo Takamori is remembered as a tragic hero, a man who stood for tradition in a time of change. His legacy is one of honor, loyalty, and the unbreakable spirit of the samurai. A man can die but once. What matters is how he dies and what he leaves behind.